switch is behind the Evita XL, the Draeger, and you just push that button and that is off, and you push it and you hear the noise and it's going on. Notice. Okay, so setting up the Draeger ventilator. We're going to have a couple videos on setting up the Draeger because there's some additional settings we'll talk about in future videos, but this is going to be our basic setup. So from the standby screen, you always want to set up new patient, then you would check adult, go ahead and do so, and then you're going to make sure you're on tube, not mask, right? And then if I go ahead and do that, I am going to get to my ventilator setting screen. Let me go ahead and close that again. Just by touching the screen down here, I'm opening up this tab system. So the Draeger kind of works on a tab system. So if you touch the different tab, you'll get additional settings. Kind of like an old index card system that you would have to look things up. So you need to make sure that you need to touch what you're going to set it up on in order to get those additional settings. So in this case, we're going to use CMV or assist control, and we're going to stay in volume. So I'm going to set my settings. So in this scenario, we're going to go down to 40%, and as I go through, then I press the button to make it so. 500 tidal volume, we'll go to 550 for our particular patient. I time 1 second. Respiratory rate, we're going to go down to 10, and it goes really fast. Look how I moved the knob and it kind of moved really quickly. Our slope, this is how fast our time's going to be delivered. We'll just set that according to your patient scenario. And our PEEP, it's preset to 0, so do not forget to set your PEEP. You're going to want a PEEP of 5 here. Okay, so once I get that, I have all those settings on there, I'm going to go ahead and press the start button. So when I get to, it'll get me back to this screen, and these are all the settings I just chose, and I'm going to go ahead and press start. Now it's ventilating my patient, and it'll take a few minutes for a couple of breaths for me to start reading numbers. So you always want to wait a little while before you set your alarms, because these alarms are based on things like minute volume and actual respiratory rate, right? So I'm going to double check my peak pressures, right? Anytime we're in volume control, we want to look at our peak pressure first. That looks reasonable. I'm making sure I'm getting my volumes. That's true, I am. So I think I'm ready to go in and set my alarms. So right up here, I'm going to press the alarm limit button, and I'm going to take a look at my alarms. And the nice thing about the Draeger is it tells me my actual minute volume right in the middle of my low and high alarm. So it kind of lets me know I don't even have to take the time to look over here. It's putting everything right in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take my low minute volume down, maybe take my high minute volume down just a smidge, even it out, not have a weird number there. Kind of got to go slow. Peak pressure, high of 50 seems a little excessive for this patient. High tidal volume. High respiratory rate. And notice what this says. This is a spontaneous respiratory rate. It's not a high machine respiratory rate, because if you think about it, that would be redundant, right? Because it's not going to be too high. So it's going to be our patient's spontaneous respiratory rate and our apnea, right? So we're going to set our 20-second apnea. So those all look good. So I'm going to close that out. Now I'm going to go back into here, and I just touched it, and the tab system came up, and I'm going to look at additional settings. Now, the additional setting we're always going to need to set is our sensitivity or our trigger, right? So I'm going to look at my trigger, and if I notice I'm in liters per minute here, and as I go through, this is my flow trigger. So these are all in liters per minute. So I'm going to choose something reasonable, and I'm going to set that flow trigger. Okay, And so this is flow triggering, and I could turn that off. So if it was a patient that had a huge leak, like a trach patient, something that didn't have a cuff, then I could turn that off, and then I would be in pressure triggering. So another feature here that you may want to use or not use, depending on your patient, is something we call ATC. Now, what is ATC? ATC is automatic tube compensation. So this is something that is not always used, but it can be very helpful, especially with smaller ET tubes, because as you know, the smaller the ET tube, the more resistance you have. So this will automatically compensate for that. And you can choose how much compensation you would like to do. And so if we chose 100%, and we're going to choose this size tube, 8.5, right? And if I turned it on, we're going to notice that this changed my waveform a little bit. See that little bit of green that's going around here is the tube compensation. It didn't really change anything too significantly for this patient. Sometimes it will cause auto-triggering, auto flow, so you have to just kind of be aware and use it appropriately towards your specific patient disease. So if we were to change, so we have our trigger, we have our ATC, these are things we can set. There's an overview, so if we're just charting what someone else has already set, we can just kind of look at that. And then if we were to change the mode, like let's say we decided this patient's going to wake up really soon from surgery, going to switch to SIMV, it kind of kept all of our original settings, except for it added a pressure support of 10. So let's say, okay, that's fine, or we want a pressure support of 8, something like that. And it's not going to switch until I go ahead and push this a second time. So now the patient is in SIMV. So it's really important that you remember that you double check that you push the button. This is how we adjust, and this is how we change the settings or make whatever changes real. So again, if we are here, if I just want to change my pressure support, it's going to pop up. I get the whole system if I'm changing just the FiO2. But if I can change that, if I don't press this, nothing is going to happen. It's still not set. It goes right back to 10 because I did not press the button and make it change. Now notice what's happening. I have a respiratory rate of 16, and that's a spontaneous rate of 6. Okay, so I have 2 different kinds of breaths, and I'm getting all of this information right in here. You can read the majority of the things you want right in here. Some other functions we have here are things like O2 suction, which is going to turn on the oxygen. It's going to increase your oxygen to 100% so that you can suction the patient. Other things we have here is nebulizer. If you were to run a nebulizer in line and you have that extra flow going to the patient, if you let the ventilator know that you're doing that, it won't alarm. It'll compensate for the volumes and it won't start alarming for you. Logbook. This is going to be kind of our there's a couple different things under logbook. One of them is settings. So these are my setting changes we've been doing, going from volume control to SIMV. Another thing that it does is trends. So once this patient's been on for a while, it'll show you what their average respiratory rate's been. It'll show you what their average spontaneous tidal volume has been, and our minute ventilation as well. Also, we have additional values. There's a lot of values in here. You might not always need them, but that's an easy way to get those additional values. And there's table 1, table 2, and you can set these in another video series. We'll go ahead and go into how to set these additional values and set these parameters, because you can get a lot of numbers from here. inspiratory hold. If we were going to do a plateau, right, that's how we would do it. We would just hold on to our inspiratory hold. And as we scroll through these screens, we can have additional numbers. So there's our plateau. I went into screen 2 and I got my plateau right there on the top. If you notice, this is our scalar here. This is our centimeters of water pressure. So you can kind of figure that out as well by looking at the actual graph. That red line up there is just what you'd think it'd be. That's our alarm. So if you ever have a patient where it's limiting or cycling off, you'll know that because your peak pressures are going to be hitting that red line. So, alarm limits we went over, alarm silence, just like it sounds, is right there. Sensor parameter. This is for our O2 sensor. Currently now we have it off because we're using only room air here in the lab. So that's how we would do calibration and monitoring. Flow sensor, that's something we'll go over in an additional series, and that's our flow sensor right there, and we would calibrate that. And that's especially important to do if your volumes are not making sense. Like right now I have this patient set at 550, my mandatory volumes are greater than that, and my spontaneous volumes, because we're in pressure support, are in the 200. So it all looks like it's making sense. If at any point the numbers just look wonky, you want to calibrate your flow sensor. A lot of times that's what that is. So that's our sensors. And that is the Draeger in a nutshell.